The integrity of our justice system is under scrutiny. The common perception is that it is unfair. In a society where the rule of law is paramount, unfairness or the very perception of it is unacceptable. People of color make up 30% of the population, but account for 60% of those in prison. The numbers simply don't add up. We know from a multitude of scientific studies that bias is compromising our justice system. Many of us are quick to point the finger at police officers, judges, jurors, and prosecutors. But the evidence also demonstrates public defenders and defense attorneys are not immune to implicit or unconscious bias. They may subconsciously compromise their clients' claims of innocence and encourage guilty pleas. As ABA president, I have made it a priority to bring together experts to help reduce bias and ensure a just system for all Americans. The centerpiece of the effort is training videos and toolkits to increase awareness and promote positive steps we can take to mitigate our implicit biases. I am pleased to be able to share with you this overview for public defenders and defense attorneys.
Justice is not blind. People begin their judgment even before they start to think about an individual case.
Unconscious bias threatens the ideal that we all fight for, which is equal justice under the law.
This is not about people being bad. This is about the brain is looking for what goes together.
We have a system that, in fact, does not produce a fair outcome.
The more Afrocentric features a defendant has, the longer the sentence will be.
When we find embarrassing data, are we just going to sweep it under the rug? Or are we going to say, you know what, those are embarrassing facts, but we can do better?
The environment in which public defenders work is exactly the environment in which these unconscious biases flourish.
Public defenders in particular have enormous caseloads and have little choice but to make quick judgments.
The kind of flash judgments they constantly have to make. How much time do I spend on this one? Do I just plead this one out? Do I accept this? He's lying.
All of these discretionary decisions that have to be made quickly means that unconscious bias will likely influence all of them.
Implicit bias is a mental association that we are not aware of that nevertheless influences our actions.
The pernicious thing about unconscious bias is it makes us racist in an unconscious way.
The reason why we call it implicit is because we don't know that our brain is doing it. So our brain is going ahead and making all sorts of conclusions without sending us an announcement.
We're very good at making very quick, snap judgments. We do it all the time. They're judgments about where we are, what we're doing, and where we're going we can make without thinking about. It's part of what makes us smart, but it creates a vulnerability as well.
Implicit bias is about shortcuts. It's about substituting what you think or what you've become accustomed to seeing or believing, and the shortcuts can be a problem.
I went into a restaurant once, and it was a Chinese restaurant. I was done with my meal, and I call over to a Chinese gentleman in the back and waved him over and said, "Will you wrap this up for me?" And what he said to me was, "I'm not a waiter. I was sitting at the table right next to yours." And I realized in that moment that I, without thinking, acting quickly, not questioning my objectivity, had made assumptions based on my unconscious associations that because he was Chinese, he was a waiter in a Chinese restaurant. But I was appalled at what I had done. And it was a true learning moment for me because consciously, I'm the most egalitarian person I have ever met.
I have clients who are from the poorest neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. I know they're African American. I know they come from impoverished areas of the city. I grew up poor, but I have 3 degrees. I have a degree in political science, my law degree, and my journalism degree. Even though my clients may be poor, my bias may sometimes be the fact that They find themselves in all of this trouble, and why couldn't they overcome this?
When my great-grandfather came from Mexico to the United States, he had 12 kids, but he left the 2 dark-skinned kids in Mexico and took the 10 lighter-skinned kids to the United States. My father and all of his brothers have all married women who are white. And so naturally, I was not surprised when I looked at my implicit bias results to see that I have an automatic preference toward light skin.
Reaction time measures like the well-known IAT, or the implicit association test, have given us a mountain of social psychological data that's really stunning.
Public defenders really should take the implicit association test. It really is an eye-opener.
You sit in front of a computer, basically, and the computer measures the speed at which you respond to stimuli that's sent on the screen. I know it sounds preposterous, but the best way to measure the strength of mental associations is to actually have you respond to images and stimuli on a computer.
I didn't expect myself to be as biased as I came out in the test. And I actively worked really hard to do the test. I knew what the test was trying to do, and I tried so hard to work against it. And I thought I did. And so when the results came out that I was still biased, it bothered me. It really did.
So I think there are 3 sets of things I want defense attorneys to think about. First is mindset. It's really important for all of us to be humble. It's paradoxically only by being humble and recognizing that you are deeply fallible that you could actually become more objective.
You have to be sitting in humility at all times, wanting to be taught what is true versus thinking you know what is true.
You got to be humble. You got to just own it that we are very good machines, but not perfect. The second thing is slow down. It turns out that if we go really fast, really anxious, and especially if we're in high emotional states, really happy or really angry, those emotional states and this kind of need for speed, this urgency, often leads us to break consistently with our implicit stereotypes.
If I could say one thing to any actor in the legal system, it's to slow down.
Slow it down. Slow it down. When you're in the midst of your bias, slow down your evaluation.
Take a moment to write out the assumptions you've made about the person or think through the assumptions you've made about that person slowly and carefully.
It is, I think, valuable for you to take a moment, breathe, and slow down and be mindfully intentional about your equality.
It doesn't take a long time. It doesn't have to take days or weeks. It doesn't need to clog up the court. Just some second guessing of what it is you believe about that person that isn't necessarily true, that's arisen from the implicit assumptions you have about people of that race, gender, age, class.
The third point is to be internally motivated to be fair and square. There's great evidence that says you might have this bias, but if you're highly motivated to avoid discriminatory behavior, and that motivation doesn't come from external requirements, i.e. you're not worried about the PC police coming down and hitting you on the head, you're not worried about just bad PR, but you actually just want to be fair and square. That internal motivation to want to be fair and square actually does matter a lot.
You have to ask yourself, what am I noticing and what am I not acknowledging?
What are you assuming about that litigant that may or may not be true?
And what information do I not have? What is missing?
Writing is an excellent cure for implicit bias. It engages sort of different parts of the brain, a few comments on paper. And that's where people tend to find that they uncover hidden assumptions that they've made because of their implicit associations.
I would just do my personal inventory, and I might invite others to say, hey, when you see this, or if you notice a pattern, I'm going to be looking for my own patterns, people who make me nervous. You can feel it inside you sometimes. Why am I having this physical response? What is that about when I don't know this person?
Implicit bias is a bit like an emotional reaction, and you can detect that if you see it happening.
That means I'm going to have to pay very strict attention. Here's the difficult thing about all of us who have been doing anything for a long time. We love our guts.
We all love our guts, especially lawyers. Lawyers really think they can trust their guts. And what I'm telling you is the best evidence suggests your guts aren't nearly as good as you think.
I I have people who will say to me, I can tell who a person is from the minute they walk in, and I'm like, okay, fine, so you got a gut. I'm just gonna tell you your gut is contaminated.
Our guts aren't that good, so we have to be careful about subjectivity and discretion.
As a public defender, I want to give every single client the time and attention he or she deserves. And yet, when I'm overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed with all of my cases and all of my clients, I'm going to rely on my quick gut feeling about a client. And it's those gut feelings that can be influenced by unconscious racial bias if we're not aware that these unconscious biases can influence our judgments and our behaviors.
We have to recognize it and then seek to overcome it. And that may mean we have to bend over backwards, but so be it.
One of the best ways, I think, to try to overcome the influence of these unconscious biases on our behaviors is to pay attention to the particular client who is sitting in front of you.
I recognize who they are, where they come from, what their lives might have been like.
I want to know what were the most significant events in your life? Who should I talk to about you?
If I can do that, then I'm able to try to relate to them and most of all, hear them and respect them.
The fact that so many people plead guilty and that so many cases are resolved without a trial only magnifies the importance in negotiations of figuring out where is their unconscious bias, where is their automatic preferences, and what can I do to minimize or negate those effects.
Public defenders do this work to fight for equal justice. But at the same time, we have to be able to understand and turn the lens on ourselves and understand that these biases can also influence us as much as they can influence the police, the prosecutors, and the judges. Because until we can do that, we are actually not living up to the ideals of equal justice.